I wanted to understand the stories that were playing out in my brain. And so when I asked myself, why is it so bad? What makes it so shameful, so distressful that your low back started hurting when you were trying to walk from your car to the gazebo? And that is what revealed my actual motivations for moving my body. Up until that point, I had really done a lot of work on unlearning the stories and the narratives around moving my body to lose weight. I'd pretty much resolved or come to a place of radical acceptance that my body size was probably not going to ever be what a younger version of me thought it should have been. But I had not yet tapped into the underlying layer of my body grief, specifically correlated to internalized ableism. Welcome to the Body Grievers Club. Hi, friend. I am your host, Bree Campos from Body Image with Bree. I am a fat positive body image coach, educator, and trained mental health counselor. My goal is to help you stop hating your body and learn how to move through unavoidable body grief. This won't be your average body image advice. No affirmations, no fluff, no filter. I am prepared to say the quiet parts out loud. And no matter how overwhelming or hopeless your body image feels, you belong here. Welcome to the Body Grievers Club. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Body Grievers Club. Today, I'm going to be talking you through my movement journey. I'm going to talk to you about how 5 years ago, my exercise practice was non-existent, and how today it is intuitive, it is consistent, it feels good, it is honoring to my body. And back then, this is where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the healing. I wanted to be in the place where I didn't have to think about my relationship to movement, that it would be autonomous. But the reality is that that's not how this works. We do not get to just be in the healing. We do not just get to be at the end of the story. We have to go through it. That is what my framework of the Body Grievers method is all about, is sitting in the suck, is going through the discomfort so we can get to that place of respite. I think the other thing too is that sometimes we think it's going to look differently when we're on this side, and so I want to bring it into reality for you. Let me back up a little bit and bring you into my movement journey 5 years ago. So this is November. Let's go to November of 2021. Actually, we'll go a little bit earlier. So think back to the pandemic. Let's say it's like March, April of 2020. But up until this point, I was consistently working out at a gym, at strength training. I was working out maybe 3 to 4 times a week, 3 at best. And I was already body image with Brie. I had already healed my relationship to food, and I was on my way to sort of healing my relationship with movement as well. I really enjoyed movement. I really enjoyed being strong. I really enjoyed, the community aspect of working out. And then the pandemic hit. And the gym that I had previously gone to went virtual. And so all of these things that we used to do in person, we're doing them virtual. And I found myself not as excited to show up, and that I was missing the workouts. And I'd be like, I'll just go back and watch the replay. The best lie any ADHD person will ever tell themselves. I'll just go watch the replay. Not happening, girlfriend. I also was working really hard in my business because my reliable job of being a trauma in-home intensive counselor, I wasn't allowed to go in home. And so I was trying so desperately to get children, I was working with kids, to log on to Zoom to do a session. That didn't work out well either. And so when that stopped working and I was like, I need to make money, then I started putting all of my eggs in my body image with Brie basket. And I was like, all right, let's see what happens. And that's the best part of this story, is that's why I'm here today. I mean, my favorite part of the day was logging off of work and coming on and doing an Instagram live. So Instagram live always feels like my roots for me. If you've been here from a long time ago, I used to call it late night chats with Brie. So I'm trying to navigate this new world of being socially distant. All of the routines and the things that I had sort of implemented were gone. And I had given myself permission to rest, right? I was like, okay, you know what? This is the season of life that we're in. It's fine. Everything is going to be okay. And then a friend of mine, when we were allowed to social distance hang, we decided to go to a park, and we got lunch, and then we were going to socially distance, sit and eat lunch together. And it was the first moment of what I call body image distress that arose around movement. Body image distress, or what I like to call the oh shit moment. I'm sure you all are familiar with that, where something happens and the narrative in your brain is, oh shit. Uh-oh, here we like this is not good. And so the task at hand was, I'd walked from my car. We were walking to this gazebo. It couldn't have been more than maybe, I don't know, like half a mile, not even, like I don't even know. I'm really bad at conceptualizing space time. It wasn't a far distance, and my low back started hurting. And the first thought that popped in my head was, oh shit. I started to go down the spiral. My friend's talking to me. I'm not even listening to her. And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's because I stopped going to the gym. And I wonder if I've lost all of the training and the strength that I had built over the last 20 years, but specifically the last 2 years. And when I noticed the spiral, I said to my brain, and this is part of my framework, is I stopped. I stopped going down the spiral. I used my own framework on me, and I said, okay, if I keep going down this spiral, it's not going to actually make me feel better right now in this distress. So I need to ask myself, can I explore this later? We can go down the spiral as long as we want later on. For right now, I want to be present with my friend. What do I need right now? And so as soon as we got to the destination, I just looked at my friend and said, I'm going to need to stretch. My back really is hurting me. And she was like, go ahead, no problem. And so I'm on my drive home. And that is the first time I said, all right, let me engage the spiral. And I used my 7-step framework of trying to explore the thoughts and the fears that were coming up. I wanted to understand the stories that were playing out in my brain. And so when I asked myself, why is it so bad? What makes it so shameful, so distressful that your low back started hurting when you were trying to walk from your car to the gazebo? And that is what revealed my actual motivations for moving my body. Up until that point, I had really done a lot of work on unlearning the stories and the narratives around moving my body to lose weight. I'd pretty much resolved or come to a place of radical acceptance that my body size was probably not going to ever be what a younger version of me thought it should have been. But I had not yet tapped into the underlying layer of my body grief, specifically correlated to internalized ableism. Because the absence of ability of movement was what exposed to me, I don't want to be disabled. I do not want to be fat and disabled. That's the difference too. Because I can hear my clients might even say something like, why is it wrong to not want to be disabled? It is not wrong to not want to be disabled as long as you're not judging people who are disabled, right? As long as it's not a shame narrative. Just like, I don't want to be a movement person. Like, that's just not how I want to be known. I don't want to be the person that moves, right? Like, and I'll also just add in here, there's a much different clarifier between something you do and something that you identify as. But that being said, I think many of us, specifically those of us who live in a marginalized body, do not want to be associated with being disabled. And if I were to look at any of you, if I were to try to have tapped into, hey, you're feeling this shame right now because the story you're telling yourself is that this is embarrassing, the way I would respond to you was completely different than the way I was showing up for myself. So that was my first indication of, okay, something is not aligned here with my values. So there are 5 things that I've written down. 5 things I needed in order to heal my relationship with movement. And the first thing that I needed to do was I needed to, first and foremost, explore the shame stories when I didn't engage in movement, when my body was in pain, or when I was no longer able to do movements that I was once able to do. And when I say explore the shame, one of my, 7 steps in my framework is building objective awareness. And my whole concept on building objective awareness is that we lead with curiosity and not criticism. So criticism is, why can't you walk from the car to the gazebo? Well, what's wrong with you? What, you used to be able to do that, no problem. This is embarrassing that you're not able to do that. Whereas curiosity is, oh, that's interesting. I'm not able to do this movement that I was once able to do. I wonder why this is feeling so distressful for me. And what I realized was, oh, you know what? Like, I had lost my consistent movement practice. And up until this point, I had been saying to myself, I just got to do it. I just have to pull myself up by my bootstraps and just regiment myself and do it. Now, what foresight I have now that I didn't have back then is that I had unmanaged ADHD, and actually just released a podcast episode on ADHD. And so, we talk all about this of needing to make the system work for your brain and not the other way around. One of the reasons that I was so habitual with movement was because it was part of the system. It worked with what I was doing. I would get up, I would go move, and then my whole day started. But when my day changed, when I no longer had to leave my house, well, now that became a hurdle. And not just because of my movement story, but because it was no longer fitting into the system that worked for me. And so I really had to get curious as to, why am I not choosing to move? And that required me to do the second thing, which is to give myself unconditional sexy permission to trust my body's signals, even if that meant that I wasn't going to move, even if that was to choose not to move and to choose to rest, which we'll get into. Our innate instinct is to distrust our body. For years, we have been told, your body is wrong, don't listen to your body, you're not really hungry, you're just thirsty, you don't really want dessert if you're not eating a vegetable. Like, we have just been taught to distrust our bodies. And so now, when your body is saying, I want to rest, criticism is coming in and saying, no, you don't. You can't rest. You didn't work out. You didn't earn rest. And so that goes back to the stories of, what were the stories that I was telling myself? And are those stories that I actually believe? Do they align with my values? And so part of my unconditional sexy permission was, I needed permission for a full body, hell no, I don't want to move. No explanation necessary. And I'd love to tell you that felt fun and exciting and sexy. No, that felt difficult. It felt intense. It felt shame-ridden. So another opportunity for objective awareness. That when you are giving yourself permission, if then shame and criticism come up, it's another opportunity to say, I wonder why that is. I wonder why it's feeling so difficult to say no here. A lot of my clients will say to me, Brie, I rest all the time. I don't do anything else but rest. And so my question for you is, well, how do you define rest? What does it look like for you. And if you cannot tell me what rest looks like, then you're not doing it. Because I imagine what many of you are doing is just not moving, like the absence of movement, but it's not actually feeling restorative. It's not feeling like it's filling the cup of rest that it needs to. And another thing with sexy permission is I always use this example. When we were kids, right? If you were ever like, Mom, can I go to Bree's house? And the response was, well, you can if you want to. That's not permission. I don't know what that is. That is Catholic guilt. That is ridden with expectation. Sexy permission is like, fuck yeah, let's go to Bree's house. That's so fun. Yeah, you want to not move today? Sounds ace. Like, that sounds great. If that's not happening, then you're not going to actually give yourself permission to rest. And so then there's going to be this tug of war with wanting to do the thing that you don't actually want to do. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I want to desire movement again, I want to move my body, then my first question is do you have sexy unconditional permission to not move your body? And two, do you have the ability to explore the shame stories or the stories connected to your ability or inability around movement, your desires, and the outcomes of movement? And if you don't have those two things, then this next thing is going to be virtually impossible. So I had my sexy permission. I had my exploration with curiosity instead of criticism. And there's two sort of like branches of where we can go from here. I'm going to go into this next one. The third thing I needed to do was I needed to unfuck my schedule and heal from a consistent cycle of burnout so that I could heal my relationship to rest. Let me say that again for those in the back. I needed to unfuck my schedule so that I could heal the perpetual cycle of burnout so that I could then in turn restore the relationship I had to rest. I asked earlier, what does rest look like to you? If you had asked me that in 2020, I wouldn't have been able to answer what rest felt like. If you asked me what my rest practice looked like, I would be like, I come home from working 12 hours a day, I collapse on my couch and I watch The Office until I cannot keep my eyes open anymore. Like that is not rest. And I actually have a podcast episode on this, and it's called Rest Feels Unsafe. Because when I began to explore the stories I had around rest, it was revealed to me that rest didn't feel safe. Because the story that was playing out is that my worth and value was tied to my productivity. That rest had to be earned. How can I just rest if I didn't earn it? And while that doesn't align with my values, it was very stuck. Because the first time I said, okay, one way I can practice resting is ending my workday. Especially working for yourself. If you are somebody who works from home or works for yourself, it's really easy to just keep going. And you can work at all hours of the day, at all times. And so I said, okay, I'm going to make this practice of I'm going to stop my workday. And the first day that I did that, my anxiety skyrocketed. I started to have a panic attack. I'm like, well, that's not what we want. And so I had to sit in the discomfort of recognizing, why does this feel so difficult for me? And that's when I started to realize some of those stories, that I believed that my worthiness was tied to my productivity. How much I was able to rest was tethered to how much work I put in. And then this was where the ADHD piece came in for me, but the work was never done. So I was literally setting myself up for failure, that it's like, well, I can't rest till the work is done, but the work is never done. So therefore I never get to rest. And I will tell you that I'm still in recovery from burnout. They say it can take up to 5 years. And how do I know that I'm in recovery from burnout? Is whenever I start to fall down old patterns, I can say, oh, I know what's happening. I'm falling into burnout again. So, for example, one of the things in that time period was, okay, I know the hurdle. I cannot get up to go work out. Once we're able to go back and work out again and be in the gym, I lacked motivation. And I was trying to muster the motivation. I was just like, I just gotta do it. I just gotta, if I pay money, I'm gonna motivate myself. And one of the things I teach my clients is that there are two types of motivation. There's internal and there's external. The external motivation is the pull yourself up by your bootstraps, pay the money, and feel the loss. Internal motivation is when there's an innate desire. That's what I wanted, but I was trying to do that through means of trying to force myself into movement. So when I looked objectively, or what's stopping me from showing up to that gym class, to going to the gym, I realized, well, it's because I'm staying up too late at night. And I'm staying up too late at night because I'm watching TV. And so my solution was, well, then let me stop watching TV. I'm going to cut all my streaming services. I'm going to, raw dog it. I'm going to have a life of boringness. I'm going to work. I'm going to come home and I'm going to go to the gym. That didn't work out. And so I actually used the same framework that I used for my clients, specifically for my eating disorder clients, around emotional awareness around a behavior. And so I used binge watching television as the behavior, and I pulled back and I said, let's figure out why I'm doing this. And what I got to, right, what I was able to get through this activity of, recognizing the stories that are playing out from my brain, the objective of what I was trying to experience, and how I met that and where I didn't meet that. What I was able to come to is, in the short term, I was getting what I needed. I was getting a dopamine hit of, hey, this feels good. But in the long run, I was tired. And so in that observation, I said, okay, well, I'm not really a bad person if I'm tired. I'm not a bad person. Nobody goes to jail for not going to the gym. So this shame story, this shame narrative around it not being good or it being shameful that I'm not moving my body, that's a story I'm going to have to unlearn. And I had pretty much done that at this point. But the part that I was like, oh, right? The awareness of like, well, if I want to get what I want to feel, which is rest, which is joy, is that I was going to have to stop my work day so I didn't get to the point where I was collapsing on the couch, hoping that the tiredness and exhaustion would pass. My therapist asked me sometime last year, she said, Brie, what is a hobby you can do that will not make you money? I said, attacked. Amy, if you're watching this, that was an attack. But it was a beautiful attack because I said, I don't know. And that's when I joined my choir. And as an aside, right? Like, it wasn't one day my therapist made the suggestion and then I'm going to go to this choir. There was a lot of pre-contemplation of like, let me see what choirs are in the area. Let me see what the requirements are. Let me see what their performances are like. Let me put it on my calendar and if I'm free. And then I literally had to get an accountability buddy, my friend, who may or may not be watching this live. And I said, I need you to push me to go to this thing because I keep avoiding it. I know I'm going to enjoy it, but this is how I get more joy. And I did, and I went, and now it's innate. And now I know every other Monday I go to choir, and it's fun, and it's joyful, and it's an opportunity to do something that's not going to make me money. And that time is carved out. So needing to add joy into your life, into your calendar, so that you can find pockets of rest, developing what rest can look like. One of the things I have all of my clients do when they tell me I'm burned out or I'm struggling to figure out what rest looks like for me, I recommend taking Sandra Dalton's 7 Types of Rest quiz. And I didn't know there were 7 types of rest. I thought there was just the physical rest. But there's sensory rest. There's emotional rest. There's social rest. How are you doing in those areas? And how can we add in to those areas so that rest feels more innate, so that there's more of a practice? The more rested we are, the more likely we are to move, the more likely we are to have that innate desire to move so that we can rest. So anytime I start finding myself going down a spiral where I'm like, why am I refusing to go to bed right now? That's when I know, okay, I think I'm a little bit on the burnout train. How do I unfuck this? How do I stop the cycle in motion before it gets any worse? So I had divvied off, right? There was two parts. So the first part was the unfucking my schedule. The second part is unlearning the internalized ableism stories that are attached to our body and our movement, right? Unlearning internalized ableism when my body doesn't work optimally, when movement is hard, movement that I was previously able to do, bringing in that objective awareness, curiosity over criticism of, yeah, you know what? I used to be able to walk from my car to that gazebo and I wouldn't have to think about it. It's hard for me right now. Why does that feel so unsafe? Feels unsafe because I don't want to be disabled, because I can't be fat and disabled. That I want to be the good fatty. If you're familiar with Stacey Bias's archetypes of a fat person, the good fatty is an archetype where, okay, it's okay if you're fat, but as long as you're healthy. And as long as health is a barometer of something you can fail at, as long as your health is a tether to your enoughness, that is how you will stop yourself from tuning in and connecting to your body and determining, is this intuitive? Is this actually something I desire? Do I desire health, or do I desire adequate health care? Do I desire mobility, or do I fear a world that is not equipped to help people who are disabled, or is not made for people who are disabled? And I'll be very frank. There are still internalized ableism stories that pop up for me. I have a podcast episode on refusing a wheelchair at the airport. And y'all, this is not that long ago that I was like, yep, I am choosing my ableism right now. And I'm refusing a wheelchair because of this story of this shame. But even that, right, in that episode, what is revealed to me is that my desire to not use the wheelchair wasn't even what was bringing up grief for me, but the fear that I'm a fraud, that I'm fucking body image with Brie, and I'm opting in to anti-fatness and ableism. How are any of my clients going to believe me? That grieved me more than the rejection of the wheelchair. The way that I met myself in that suck was to say, I get to be the body griever today. And even as I say that, y'all, like, it brings up emotion. I hate being the body griever. It sucks to be the body griever. I know. But in sitting in that suck, it allows us space to observe, to build objective awareness, to offer sexy permission, and for autonomous healing. That's where the innateness will come, is through the listening to our body, as opposed to telling our body to shut up and do what we think it should do. So let's go through my 4 points so far. 1, explore the shame stories around movement, around when you choose to engage in exercise or a movement, when you choose not to. Even if if you choose to move and then you're celebrating that, and there's a sense of morality of like, like, look at me, I did it. Can we get curious as like, all right, would you have felt shame if you didn't? Because as long as you're celebrating I want to be so clear. It's so messy, y'all. That there are times where I'm like, yes, that's a win. That feels like a win. But as long as it's not tethered to my enoughness, I keep using that phrase, to my enoughness. That is from my friend Hannah Husband. They have an amazing framework around healing your relationship to movement. I will be sure to tag them below. And we also have a podcast episode on movement and how do we change that story. And so yeah, that like what I do or don't do does not impact my enoughness, that I do not have to earn rest, that I get to unlearn the internalized ableism and anti fat beliefs and stories when my body doesn't work the way that I want it to. I was just saying this to Hannah earlier. Like, I remember being in sixth grade and not being able to cross my legs like all of the other girls. And sixth grade Bray thought it was because she was too fat. And now I'm like, girl, you had hip issues back then. You had mobility, flexibility issues as early as that age. The way my hips are structured makes sense. It makes sense to me now. Sixth grade Brie felt shame for not being able to cross her legs. It was shameful that that was something she wasn't able to do. 2020 Brie felt shame for not being able to cross from the car to the gazebo. 20, I don't know, let's use 2012 Brie was embarrassed that she could no longer really bend over to tie her shoes. That mobility, that movement was no longer accessible to her. But all of those different variations of me blamed myself, blamed my body, as opposed to kind of like with my ADHD. All right, well, my body works differently. How do I work with my body? That there's actually no morality around being able to tie your shoes, cross your legs, walk across the street without getting out of breath. Like, none of those things impact your enoughness. Hannah Husband talks all about that in their framework to healing movement. Number 3, I had to unfuck my schedule and end the cycle of burnout so that I could heal my relationship to rest. I needed to explore what rest looks like for me and find ways to rest that worked within the system for me, not the other way around. So, some people like rest of like my friends, if any of them are watching, I love you. They all love the spa. There's a spa near us. And I like the spa. I don't love the spa. Probably because there's a lot of walking around in the spa. There's a lot of like temperature changes and sensory changes that just feel like a nightmare for me. I have plantar fasciitis. So walking around all day really just doesn't sound fun to me. But what does sound fun for me, what feels restful, I love getting on the couch, getting all cozy with a nice book, or watching a TV show with a cozy blanket and a warm drink. That feels like rest to me. So someone else's rest doesn't have to be my rest. And also, not every time is that rest going to be helpful. Number 4, I had to give myself sexy, unconditional permission to trust my body and my body's signals, even if it meant I felt pain. And that feels uncomfortable when my low back gets activated. When my low back gets activated, it does not have to be attached to a story. It doesn't have to be my body's fault. It just means that my low back is activated. When we divorce ourselves from the story, from the judgment, from the internalized ableism, it actually allows us to be more objective. I shared on Instagram a story sequence about wanting to go for a walk, and my low back got activated and my foot got activated. If you've been following me, you know I sustained an injury. And there was a moment where I was like, I think I could push. And then I said to myself, why though? What is the purpose of pushing? Like, why are we going to push ourselves? And really, the reason I wanted to push myself was like, I want to be tired. I want to feel tired at the end of the night. And I was right. I was not tired at the end of the night because I did not engage in movement. But I gave myself unconditional sex permission to say, nope, we're going to stop today. And if I'm wrong, like, that's okay. That's really good information for next time. I started trying to figure out, why did my foot hurt? And I realized that day I took all of my client calls in my office. And in my office, my feet don't touch the floor, which caused my foot to strain, which then activated the injury, which brought upon the plantar fasciitis, which made walking harder. I also wanted to go to Pilates, which I want to talk about, and the class was full. So I was like, crap, I need a backup option. I started doing Pilates when I found out that Pilates was actually created for people with disabilities. Joseph Pilates created movement where you could work on building strength even if you were disabled, even if you didn't have full function in standing. And so everything in Pilates is supported. Another barrier to movement is being able to find places and environments that are welcoming for people who look like me. And what was really important for me in trying to find a studio for Pilates was that they were going to take modifications, that I know my limitations, and you can shout out instructions, but if my body says no, then I'm not doing it. And this place does a really nice job of finding accommodations. The teacher will come over and be like, I'm going to lower your bar for you. If my low back got injured in class the other day and I raised my hand, and she was like, I want you to stop doing this movement and I want you to just stretch. And as I was lying there stretching, I was like, this is where I needed to be. I needed to go through everything I had to get to this point. That when my body feels pain, it doesn't feel shameful. It doesn't feel like my body's broken or that it's not working optimally. It's just my body talking to me. And I think that I just went hard and didn't engage my core properly. And then it was one twinge. And then that was it. And I said, okay, body, thanks for letting me know. I'm going to be more cautious next time. I'm going to be more intentional. Same thing yesterday with my walk that I was going to go on. I just started booking it. I was like, yeah, I got energy. Let's go. I didn't warm up my body. I didn't stretch. And I thought about it. I was like, nah, I'm not going to stretch. Okay, maybe that's not a possibility for me. And that gets to be frustrating. But it doesn't have to be shameful. And if it is shameful, I get to explore and unlearn those stories. And last but not least is I had to sit in the suck of time. 5 years. It has been 5 years since I have had a formal movement practice. Y'all, it's bringing up emotion. I didn't even know it was there. So often in this work, it's really hard to measure progress because we're measuring beliefs. And sometimes the only evidence that we have is time. Time does not have the ability to heal wounds. That phrase, time heals all wounds, bullshit. Time heals nothing. The only thing time allows you to do is to become more familiar with it. And the more I became familiar with the stories and the shame narrative and the hurdles, using my 7-step framework to navigate through discomfort, through shame, through stories that my brain was telling me, and then being able to see it over time. Where I am today is where I wanted to be 5 years ago. I wanted to be the after story. What does that sound like? Diet culture all over again. I didn't want to be struggling. I wanted to be healed. Wishing myself into healing did not get me there. But grieving did. Sitting in the suck of the shame and the stories and the internalized ableism and the beliefs that clearly dissent from my values. Separating out the suck from the story and not letting, hey, even though these things are floating around my brain, even though I'm feeling these things, I know I'm rejecting that. I don't believe anybody has to earn rest, even if that's a story I'm believing for myself. I don't believe anybody is a bad person because they get low back pain when they walk. Even if I'm feeling that for myself, even just building that awareness is a stepping stone in the bridge from body grief to radical body acceptance to get to this place. So if you are watching this and wishing you could be where I'm at, You wish you were in the healing, right? You are in the part of the story where it's happily ever after. Here's what I know is that even in happily ever afters, like, we don't get the next chapter. We don't know what happens next. There is no experience in life that it's like we get to this happy place and then the happiness is sustained and then we never have to look at it again. And what I know is that I thought I had healed my relationship with movement until another level of beliefs, stories bubbled up to the surface. And then I said, oh, I got another layer to go. And so that's what feels so safe about where I'm at now, is that no matter what happens with my mobility, if my foot injury were to give out completely and I were to lose my ability to walk, I know that it would suck. I know that it would be painful, but I trust myself and my body to navigate through that grief because I've already done it. I've already gone through the grief and come out the other side. And the other side doesn't look like how I thought it would look, but it feels exactly like I thought it would feel, which is the absence of shame, the absence of distress, mental distress, not absent of physical discomfort. There is still physical discomfort. Even today, like my shoulder has been hurting. And a prior time, I would have somehow blamed myself for that shoulder pain. I have a podcast episode called Body Pain is Not Punishment. Changing the story around pain allows me to change my story around movement. So those are my 5 things that I've done. When this becomes a podcast episode, I will link all of the things that I've talked about into the show notes so that you have those resources. There were some questions that were submitted, so I want to make sure I save time for those. I just want to thank you for listening, for joining us for this episode. And I just want to encourage you that no matter where you are in your movement story, that you are in the middle of your story. You do not need to predict the ending. It's going to be better than you even imagined, even if it doesn't look like how you thought it would. One of the first questions that was submitted to me: how do I know when a particular movement is enough? How do you make movement not feel diety? And I think that this comes back to body trust, right? How do you know how much sleep you need, how much water you need? Sure, there's these recommended amounts, but some days I'm sure you drink less than the recommended amount. Sometimes you drink more. If you're like me, you drink a lot less than the recommended amount. And so you need like reminders to be like, hey, drink your water. Unlike my houseplants, super dehydrated. When it's starting to feel diety, when it's starting to feel like, okay, I need to get this much movement in, the question I would ask you is to come to your why. If your why is rooted in ableism or anti-fatness, you're never going to sustain a consistent practice. If it's rooted in ableism or in anti-fatness, what does that look like? If your desire to move consistently is, I want to move so that I don't lose my mobility because my mobility impacts my enoughness. Like, it feels too shameful to think about not being able to, go and walk and adventure with my family or go on vacations with my family and walk to the beach. Like, not that it would suck, because it would suck, but that it's a source of shame for self. Then that's not going to ever produce a long-standing, consistent goal. Whereas if you can recognize, yeah, there's grief that's coming up around limited mobility, I'm going to take some time to grieve that. Anytime that grief narrative comes up, I'm going to spend some time here. And I will tell you that at every iteration of my journey. When I found myself unable to do a movement or feeling difficulty with a movement, something that I was able to do, something I've never done, yeah, that it brings up a new feeling. It's like, wow, this is interesting. But then where does it go? Where is it rooted in? Now, if you're like, you know what, I'm going to go on the vacations anyway, and I know that if I were to be consistent with movement, I think I would be able to keep up. And it's sort of like a test for myself. Can I do it? Cool. That is not tied to your enoughness. That is a experimentation, absent of expectation. If I'm not able to keep up, will that steal my joy? No, it'll suck, it'll be frustrating, but it will be frustrating. I won't be frustrated at me. Then that will create some more awareness for you of, all right, so there's room here for exploration. There's room here to see if you can identify a goal or a desired outcome. My most recent desire for movement came from my motivation to sleep better. As somebody with ADHD, somebody who is home all of the time, I feel like my body has a hard time signaling, like, we're done, like, end of day, we're tired. I was not tired at night. And so I found anytime I did any movement, I was like, oh, I am tired at night. My brain is just using all of that energy. So my motivation for movement actually came from wanting to sleep better. And my desire to sleep better came from, I want to be a little bit more consistent in my day. But I can't be consistent in my day because I'm staying up too late at night. And so then it's messing everything else up. So it's hard to create consistency. So I said, okay, well, if I were to be consistent in my movement practice, and just as a little aside, in my movement practice, in my movement story, I would say the last 2 years, I have engaged in movement. It just has been like a Russian roulette. Like, maybe we will, maybe we won't. And I realized, actually, with my ADHD, when I have to make a decision, it's too hard. I'm like, I could go to yoga, I could go to Pilates, I could go for a walk. Nope, I needed to take choice out of it because the choice was the barrier for me. So I said, great, if I invest in a Pilates pass, this is my option. If I want to do something else, I can. But I have a consistent, I know where I'm going. I know how long it takes me to get there. I can add my routines in around it. Like if I have to go pick up my prescription or, all of those things. I had to trial out some classes. I tried out some studios. There was a lot of preparation before the action. And I would say the last 2 years really got me there. I also just moved into this house about 2 years ago. And the financial piece of like, I don't want to spend money on anything else. I just bought a house. So I was like, I'm just going to move with what I have around me. That didn't work either. I realized that the co regulation piece was a motivator for me. I love being with other people, even if I don't talk to you, even if I don't have a conversation with you or know your name, we're doing a joint thing together. And that was one of the things I loved about working out at a gym with personal training or in a group class. There was like a community collective that you don't get virtually. One of my best friend, she loves to go for walks. I don't. It's just not, I would rather go to a Pilates class than go for a walk. I love the finiteness of it. There's a start time, there's an end time, and I know what to anticipate. There's so many things that could go like on a walk with temperature, like, I don't know. There's just so many things. I'm like, that's not for me. So I had to figure out what worked for me. So the way that we make it not diety, one is figuring out what your why is. And then two, how do you know how much is enough? Even in that, it's diety. Like, even your question is diety because your question is asking, well, how do I know? How do I get this to be a check mark of I did enough movement today? Can you trust your body to let you know? And is it okay to be wrong? So, yesterday I wanted to go for a walk and I got to the end of my block and said, nope, and turned on around and I came back up. That was as much as my body could do. Was that enough? Do you think I'm allowed to say, yeah, I moved yesterday? I count it because I don't count my movement in that way anymore. My counting of my movement is, did I do this thing I set out to do because I want to improve my sleep? Or because it's the kindest thing I could do to my body? I didn't end up walking, but then I did stretch. I did lay on my yoga mat and have that time on my yoga mat. But even if I hadn't, I would have counted the movement, because this is not something that we can measure in that way. And if we're still measuring it, it's still rooted in wellness culture. Great question. That was from one of my clients. So we have a group call in a little while, so we can unpack that a little bit more together. How do you navigate limited mobility with friends and loved ones? Uh, I see some folks on here who I just went to a conference with, and there were some mobility things at the conference that in a prior time that might have caused shame for me to navigate. For instance, needing to be able to sit down after a few minutes because of the injury. It's too much for my foot to not have the ability to sit. And I think just like anything else, it comes with practice. Sometimes I like to rehearse things. I remember the first time I had to tell a family member that I didn't want to go to the show that they wanted to go to because I was going to need an accommodated seat. And it wasn't really a show I wanted to go to. And so it didn't feel like worth the effort. It didn't feel like something I really wanted to navigate. So, yeah, I said, okay, I have an opportunity here. I get to share with this person, or I can choose not to. I went out to eat with some family the other day, and my one of the people in my family was like, "Can we get a booth?" And I looked at them. They were like, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, "Yeah." And the booth situation ended up being okay from a width perspective, but my feet didn't touch the ground. And so what happened? 5'1" Brie, my feet are dangling off the ledge, which then caused me to push my foot down, which then strained my foot, which then ended up causing worse plantar fasciitis. And so next time I'm like, all right, I'm going to say I prefer not a booth. And if you're gonna, and it was a high top booth, so like it wasn't a high top booth, but it was like a raised booth. So it's not even like I could pull a chair over. You have to be willing to make other people uncomfortable for your comfort. And I want you to approach it as if somebody were coming to you with this information. How would you respond? And if you would respond with kindness, compassion, can you trust one person in the group to be able to hold that compassion for you? Maybe you don't have to make an announcement to the entire group. One of the most magical things about my Costa Rica retreat was the openness and the freeness about communicating needs around mobility, around movement. There were things I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this. And it was like, we're going to try. Like, I'm going to try. And if I can't, I will sit in the discomfort of that. But like, we're going to do it together. And there was something so like healing about being around other people who understand the struggle. And so get more fat friends who don't hate themselves. That's how I would navigate this one. How do you come to terms with your larger body not being able to do the things it used to be able to do? And how do you get back to those activities? I would say probably one of the most consistent like body griever pain points that I see is when folks say, I just wish I could like bend over and tie my shoes and put on socks and paint my toenails. Like it feels embarrassing that I can't do those things. And my first inclination is that that is not a weight issue. That is a mobility one. That is a flexibility issue. And if you do not believe me, I want you to look up fat people who are super flexible. I'll give you an example. Jessamine Stanley. Jessamine Stanley can do a headstand. Jessamine Stanley can do a split. Flex with Vera, I think is her account. I bought her hip opener course. She had a whole course on splits, on how to work on your splits through hip openers. And I'm like, well, I need a hip opener. I was like, I've had issues since I was 16. And so fatness is not the issue, but mobility or flexibility might be. Another grievance that I hear my body grievers say. I was out of breath I was huffing and puffing when I was walking, and I'm embarrassed by that. As long as your motivation is to not be seen as a fat person, or it is rooted in anti-fatness or in ableism, you will never create sustainable change. It's not going to change. There is nothing inherently wrong with being out of breath. There is nothing inherently wrong with not being able to bend over and tie your shoes. I am also a fan of slip-on shoes. I have a friend who made fun of my ortho feet shoes. He said, "What are you, 110?" I said, "What are you, ageist?" I love my ortho feet shoes. They are so great for arch support, and they're slip-ons. I'll be sure to link them below through ortho feet. There is nothing inherently wrong with being unable. So that would be the first place I would start is, can you challenge that narrative? And if it feels like there's grief, what's the worst part about not being able to do those movements? One of the biggest grievances I had about accepting my body was this archaic grief of wanting to be carried over the threshold. I wanted to be able to, when I got married, have my husband to lift me up and carry me over the threshold. And the longer I've stayed in this larger body, the less realistic that feels. This grief has shown up when my niece or my nephew, when they were little and they tried to sit on my lap, and my stomach is larger, and so it prevents them from being able to sit on my lap. I can hold space for the desire and the discomfort without also shaming myself. Just like I didn't shame myself for being at the restaurant and my feet not touching the ground, because I don't see my height as personal responsibility. But if I am seeing my weight as personal responsibility, that is something to be explored. If you are desiring movements that you once were able to do that you're not able to, I would look at some functional movement, or as my friend Hannah Husband talks about, like perfunctory movement. Something I had noticed even in my movement exploration in the last couple of years was like, the first Pilates class I did, she kept saying, "Put your shoulders down." And I was like, "They don't go down." And I was like, all right, it's probably because I work on the computer. That this is probably a cost of the way I show up for my job. I have a podcast episode, Body Pain is Not Punishment, with a personal trainer that I had been working with because I was experiencing some really uncomfortable grief, stuff that I'm still struggling with. One of those things being my inability to get up off the floor. So anytime I sat on the floor, I felt like I would toddler, and I couldn't get up. And one minor change, and I'm like, oh, I can pop up like I'm like a 5-year-old. And I blamed my body size as the reason I was able to do that. Something else that happened through the pandemic is a limited mobility in reaching. So I can reach with my right arm, but I can't, it's limited with my left. It still is on my left. The other day in Pilates, she kept coming over to me and saying, "Stop favoring this leg. I've already favored this part of my body so much that it's now unlearning movement that I have been habituated to probably for years." And then especially with injuries. And one of the things I say in the episode with Dani Shapiro, who was my physical therapist, was that it feels shameful, right? I feel embarrassed that I'm not capable of doing these movements, and that is it a casualty of my job because I sit and then my shoulders are forward and that's what's causing this? And he said, well, I am going to have casualty from my job, and my job is standing. He said every movement is going to have a cost. Every not movement also has a cost too. It's just learning to work with it as opposed to believing it is a problem and that you're responsible for it. So, if you want to figure out how to be able to do tasks that you were once able to do, we have to detach the shame from it. It cannot be a moral issue. And then, can we get creative? Can we figure out how to unlearn habits that our bodies have been used to? for years. This was a great question. I'm so excited to answer this. What is the balance between pushing and listening to your body? What is the balance between pushing yourself versus listening to your body? How do you know when it's right? And this is what I say to that. Exploration, right? We have to experiment and try and be okay with getting it wrong. That maybe this was a time we could have pushed. You're not going to know until you do it. And then it's like, well, I didn't push, so I don't know. I pushed and it was too much. And now I know. So yesterday I chose not to push myself to walk because I wanted to go to Pilates. And I said, if I push myself too hard right now, that might impact my ability to do that. So I said, let me pull back. And I was not as tired as I wanted to be. And that's okay. That was just, all right. I now know that if I want to sign up for the 7:30 at night class, I'm going to have to do it a lot earlier than the 2 hours before when I was like, I want to see how I feel. No, girl, you don't get that luxury. I would use this as an example of think about pushing yourself or listening to yourself when it comes to using the restroom. How many of us ADHD folk where we're like, I don't have to pee right now. Like, it's fine. I think I'm okay. And then you're like running to the bathroom and you're like, nope, that was a mistake. I should have gone a long time ago. I have to go right now. It's information. It's learning yourself. I know I'm going to take a drive, so I probably should use the restroom now because I want to drink water on my drive. Like, a lot of it is just experimentation and learning. But just as innocuous and neutral as it is if you're like, oh, I waited too long to use the restroom, and we had a, close call situation, the same is if you say, I'm choosing not to move today. I'm choosing to not push myself. I'll give you another example. I've been very honest about, some of my mental health hurdles that I've been experiencing. And over the summer, I desperately needed a medication change. And I was feeling it. I was like, I cannot dig. There are days where I'm like, I'm going to dig. Today was one of those days. I was like, I'm tired, I'm hungry, and my body hurts, and I'm going to dig. I have clients, I have calls I need to show up for. I didn't have that. There was nothing left. And so there was this function that I agreed to go to. And I was like, I don't want to go. I don't want to do this thing. And so I had to sit with which is the discomfort I can live with. Can I choose to sit in the discomfort of going even though I don't really want to be there, or sitting in the discomfort of not going and disappointing people? And I was at a place where I was like, I'm going to disappoint people. That's fine. But the event was significant enough. It was for somebody else that I said, if my mental health wasn't where it is right now, would I be making a different decision? And the answer was yes. And so I chose to push myself to go. And it was the right call. It was the right call to go. As soon as I got there, I was like, I'm not masking. If you're familiar with the ADHD term masking, I was not going to be overly cheery. I was not going to try to rescue anybody. I was like, this is me. I'm showing up. Take it or leave it. People asked me if I was okay. I said, nope, nothing I can do about it. It's fine. Leave me alone. Like, I was just present. But as the night went on, I was like, oh, this is actually a really good call. I'm glad I came. I could not have known that unless I pushed myself. But I also could have sat in the discomfort of not pushing myself and saying, I'm not going. So as long as it's not attached to a personal moral failing, that you are not a better or worse person when you push yourself versus when you don't, the more you can build that trust and build awareness around, hey, this might be a good time to push myself. It's very similar with intuitive eating. If anybody has digestional issues, if you are in the questionable lactose intolerance club like I am, there are days I'm like, I want a fucking piece of pizza. I'm from Jersey. We do pizza. Maybe not as good as New York. Our bagels are out of this world. But I want a piece of pizza. Sounds great. If I have a function the next day, that might not be the right call. Because if I don't feel good and I have to be somewhere, that's going to impact how I feel. So there might be times I sit in the discomfort of wanting something and not doing it and not having it knowing I can have it tomorrow. I can have it the next day. I can have it any other point. I can always change. I can always re-engage. I can always try something new. But I can't undo it. I cannot unring the bell. But I get to sit with whichever discomfort I want to. I had gone out to eat with a friend of mine, and I was waiting to hear from this guy if I was going to go get a drink with him. And I was like, I want a burger right now. If I eat a burger, my stomach's going to be rumbly. And I bet you, if I don't get the burger, he's not going to contact me. But if I do get the burger, he's going to contact me. And that's exactly what happened. And I said, YOLO, like, I might have a bellyache at the bar, but I will survive that discomfort. Or I can choose not to go. I will no longer, there's another podcast, I no longer make decisions around boys. We make decisions for Brie, and the boys get to work around them. We are losing the plot, my friends. I have one more question I want to answer. Question is, where do I begin? And I would recommend starting with downloading my 7-step freebie from body grief to radical body acceptance. If you comment the word 7 steps on this live, it will take you right to that link. I believe that my framework of 7 steps, it's something you've probably heard before. You've probably heard other people say things along the same lines, but it is the tool that I will use constantly for myself. Of this is my opportunity to build objective awareness, reframe the stories that I'm telling myself, investigate the activating triggers that I'm feeling, allowing myself unconditional sexy permission, naming my needs, living my best life now, not based off of the decision of what other people are going to think or experience, but how do I want to show up? Do I want to eat the burger? Do I want to try and go for that walk? Do I want to go and sing in a choir competition? Even if I have to be one of the few people who sits during choir, I get to make that option. Just in case anyone's listening, it's 7 steps, and it's the number 7 steps. And then A is aligning to my values. Am I living in a way that is bringing me closer to the values that I live by or want to live by, or further? Does it align with my values to shame somebody who's not able to walk from the car to the gazebo, or paint their toenails, or bend over to tie their shoes? And if that doesn't align with my values, what are my values and how do I live in alignment with those? So my 7-step freebie is available also via my website, bodyimagewithbrie.com, so you can check it out there. I also have a bunch of podcast episodes, the Body Grievers Club, on all listening platforms, where I actually break down each of the 7 steps. I'm really excited for next year. I'm going to be doing a big haul on my podcast episodes and redoing episodes. And so that means I'll be doing some more lives. So as always, thank you all for joining me live. I love you. I'm confident that no matter where you are in your movement story, in your body image healing, that you are right on time. You're right where you belong. And I'm honored to be with you in your exploration. So with that, I bid you adieu. So much love to you, my friends. And until next time. Hey, friend. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Body Grievers Club. Like all of our podcasting friends, we ask that you like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who you think needs to hear it. I know that body grief is tough, but I hope this episode helped you to feel less alone. To learn more about how you can shift your body grief to radical body acceptance, be sure to check out my free 7-step guide designed to help highlight how you can transform your body image story. You can also learn how to work with me inside of the show notes. Remember, my friends, your body grief is painful and real, but you are never alone, especially when you're part of the Body Grievers Club. Thank you for listening, and until next time.